A shocking new piece of information regarding the search for missing Jay Slater has the potential to alter everything. In all of Briarwood's history, the small community had never encountered anything quite like it. An elementary school teacher named Jay Slater, who was 32 years old at the time, had vanished without a trace, and his absence had triggered a series of events that would shake the community to its very foundations. The inquiry into Jay's disappearance appeared to be heading in the wrong direction, as the days moved into weeks, yet, on a chilly morning in the fall, a fresh and disturbing piece of information finally came to light. A particular aspect that was so unanticipated that it had the ability to alter everything. Jay Slater had been a well-liked member of the town's tight-knit community, and had been a fixture there. He had a secluded life, spending long hours as a teacher, and frequently remaining late to grade papers or assist kids with extracurricular activities. He followed a peaceful lifestyle. Because he was not the kind of person who would vanish without a reason, the unexpected disappearance of him was far more troubling than would have been otherwise. The others who were left behind, including his parents, his friends, and his co-workers, were left searching for any piece of evidence that would shed light on his disappearance. In the initial several weeks of the search, there was a lot of activity. Police officers from Briarwood, together with volunteers from the community, searched every inch of the woods that surrounded the area in an effort to piece together Jay's last known movements. None of the traces of his trouble could be found in his apartment. It was the night that he vanished, and his phone had been switched off. Additionally, there was no sign of him at any of the places that he typically frequented. However, as the days progressed, it appeared that the hunt becoming colder and the clues becoming more elusive. Because of their fear of the worst, the community started to lose hope. In other words, up until the point where an uncommon hint was found. When the call came in, Detective Sarah Hayes, who was the main investigator on the case, was in the middle of a cloudy morning. A runner was out on his usual run along a route just outside of Briarwood when he came upon something peculiar along the edge of the woodland. It was a backpack. A jogger's interest was piqued by the condition of the bag, despite the fact that it was not unusual for hikers to forget their equipment behind. It had been arranged for two perfectly. It was not dropped in a hurry. Certainly not abandoned in a hurry. It was a purposeful act that had been put down. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck began to prickle as she reached the scene of the crime. Sarah ran to the location. The bag was worn but not completely worn out. It was a regular hiking backpack with a few spots of color that had faded. On the inside, she discovered belongings that did not belong to a teacher who had gone missing. Not only were there no notes or personal stuff, but there were also no textbooks or lesson plans. On the other hand, there was a large journal that was bound in leather. While Sarah was flipping through the pages of the book, she noticed that it was full with mysterious entries. These entries were scribbled, disconnected thoughts that appeared to become more chaotic as she progressed further into the book. Then there it was sitting there. As a sketch. There was a sketchy sketch of what appeared to be a figure that was tall, shadowy, and standing at the doorway of a single-story house. An eerie resemblance to a house that Sarah had seen before. The structure was situated on the outskirts of Briarwood, close to the old mill, and she had driven by it a great number of times by that point. Even though the property had been deserted for a number of years, the sketch seemed to hint at something that was significantly more frightening. While the figure depicted in the image was undeniably human, the dimensions of the figure were not quite right. Exaggerated sharpness was used in the drawing of its characteristics, giving the impression that the artist was attempting to represent something that existed beyond the domain of the tangible. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she came to the realization that the image was eerily similar to an urban legend that had been plaguing the community for many years, the tale of the Watcher. According to the local legend, the Watcher was a creature that was thought to lurk in the shadows and keep a watchful eye on people who ventured too far beyond the boundaries of the town. There had always been whispers of unusual occurrences in the woods, regardless of the fact that the majority of people disregarded it as folklore. There were reports of people seeing figures in the distance, but when they got closer, they immediately disappeared. Others asserted that they heard voices calling out to them from the darkness, and that they heard whispering on the wind. It was the kind of fable that parents told their children to prevent them from going too far at night, But after seeing the drawing, Sarah wasn't so convinced that it was simply a myth anymore. The finding of the backpack, in conjunction with the peculiar drawing, caused the investigation to take a different path. Despite the fact that the house was in a state of disrepair, Sarah was aware that they needed to inspect it. Although there had been rumors that it was haunted for a long time, there had never been any concrete evidence to back up the assertions that it was haunted. After giving it further contemplation, Sarah came to the conclusion that it was the only place that may possibly hold the answers to the questions of Jay Slater's disappearance. One of the first things that Sarah noticed upon her arrival at the residence was the complete absence of any sound. The house was situated on a hill, and it was surrounded by dense trees that filtered out a significant amount of sunlight. Despite the fact that its windows were dark and lifeless, the structure itself appeared to be sagging under the weight of time. Despite the fact that there was no indication of life anywhere in the vicinity, Sarah was unable to shake the impression that she was being watched or observed. When she looked around, the atmosphere seemed dense, as if the entire planet was holding its breath. In the interior, Sarah and her team proceeded around the rooms, and the floor made a creaking sound under their feet. The walls were covered in wallpaper that was falling off, and there was a thick layer of dust in the air. The musty odor was not what caused Sarah's stomach to turn, despite the fact that the smell of mold was overwhelming. The peculiar sensation that they were not alone was the cause of this. In the process of making her way to the back of the home, she came across something that caused a surge of anxiety to course through her chest. It was a sequence of markings that had been cut into the wooden flooring. Although the markings were poor, it was clear that they were intentional. It is possible that the very structure of the house contains carved symbols, runes, or possibly something that is even older. It appeared as though they were forming a pattern, something that seemed to radiate forth from the middle of the space. Sarah did not become aware of what she was seeing until she stooped down to inspect them more closely. She saw that the symbols were identical to those that were found in Jay's journal. Everyone was taken aback by the unexpected connection that was made. He had been present, Jay. The more Sarah thought about it, the more it appeared like he hadn't just happened to stumble into this location by chance. He had found this site in some way. The mysterious symbols, the shadowy drawings, and the unsettling connection to the Watcher all suggested that it was possible that Jay had been looking into something that was much more sinister than anyone could have possibly imagined. It was then that Sarah's crew discovered their last find, which occurred while they resumed their search. There was a door that was closed in the basement, and it was concealed beneath a heap of old furniture. The key was discovered in the pocket of Jay's jacket, which had been left behind in the house that had been abandoned. Sarah's hands were shaking as she unlocked the door, which revealed a small room that was devoid of any windows. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs that were deformed and hazy versions of people. These shots were taken from strange angles, and all of the faces had their eyes covered. There was also a photograph of Jay Slater himself, which was placed in the middle of everything. In the photograph, he was smiling in a way that was not quite appropriate. It was an old photograph that had been taken many weeks before he had vanished. During that moment, Sarah became aware of the complete scope of the events that were taking place. Jay had simply vanished without a trace. He was lured into something that was much larger and much darker than anyone in Briarwood could have ever dreamed. He had been drawn into it. There was something that had been keeping a watchful eye on the town for a number of years, waiting for the appropriate time to make its move. In the search for Jay Slater, the objective was no longer limited to locating a man who had gone missing. Getting to the bottom of a riddle that had the potential to alter everything was the goal. What was it that Jay had found out? Furthermore, what was even more unsettling was the fact that he had become the latest victim of something that had been hiding in the shadows for many centuries. The fresh information that was discovered on that day would forever alter the inquiry, and it would also mark the beginning of a descent into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated for the inhabitants of Briarwood.